Almost 3 decades ago, I was faced with the monumental task in the congregation of changing the mindset and the practice of a group of Holocaust survivors who were members of the shul. It was their idea that Yom HaShoah should be commemorated on the Sunday of convenience, because that's when more people would be able to come. And so they had done different things. There was a community Holocaust memorial service that they were all part of, and it was always on the Sunday before or after Yom HaShoah. And I presented the argument that if Yom HaShoah was going to survive as a day of commemoration, as a solemn day, and as an important day on the Jewish calendar, and it certainly was going to survive as an event observed after the passing of their generation, it had to enter into the Jewish mindset the way all other historical quasi-religious events came, and that was by putting it onto the Jewish calendar and observing it on the day. Yom HaShoah came to be as an act of the Knesset, who declared that the 27th of Nisan would be the observance of the Day of Remembrance for the Holocaust. They chose the 27th of Nisan because that was the beginning of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, and that's how that day came to be enshrined. Historically, interestingly enough, there was a debate within Israel about whether they need to have a Yom HaShoah, because the Jewish people have had 2,000 years of a day that they put on the calendar to remember tragedy and loss. And that, of course, is Tisha B'Av. And there were those who said, we don't need a Yom HaShoah, we have Tisha B'Av. But I think the smarter heads prevailed, and slowly the world accepted, and now it's pretty much universal as a day on the Jewish calendar. I was particularly gratified this year, as I say, almost 3 decades later. I was reading through the Jewish Journal last week, and I was noticing that on the pages that had to do with services, virtually every synagogue that was mentioned in Broward and Palm Beach County were having an event in the shul tonight. And I felt a little bit vindicated, you know, for what we tried, the little fight I had back then, but of course we won. I felt good because it meant that the message I was sending out then has now pretty much taken root. If synagogues observe something on the day that it's supposed to be done, it'll have a longevity. The 27th of Nisan, like the 15th of Nisan is Pesach, the 27th of Nisan is Yom HaShoah. And so we are here, Erev Yom HaShoah, to observe, to commemorate, to remember. And because when we have a day, a religious day, it's always around and built around the service. In the middle of our program and events tonight, there will be a Marav service. Lastly, there's one more ritual that's become pretty much universal in the Jewish world, and that is that we light a special Yisker Yortzeit type candle this evening that will burn through the house, but it's a yellow candle, and we have them available on the way out. If you didn't pick one on the way in, on the way out there'll be a table just outside, and they're available for you. I was asked to share with you, they cost the synagogue about $3 a piece, and we ask that you make a donation to the shul if you pick it up either right on the spot or send back an envelope later, not only to cover the cost of the candles, because that we can perpetuate the act every year, but the extra money comes in and it goes into the Kaplan Fund for the March of the Living Israel Pilgrimage. And so we have been able to send many, many kids over the years, I mean many kids, to Israel and to Poland on the various programs to touch base both with the past and with the future, with the destruction and with the Geulah, with the redemption. We're going to begin on page 2 in our special Yom HaShoah booklet with a responsive reading. Let us now pause to recall the bitter catastrophe that has befallen our people in Europe. When in the past our brothers were massacred in ruthless pogroms, the poet Bialik in his City of Slaughter cried out against this bloody savagery. Cruelties of Pharaoh, Haman, Nebuchadnezzar, and Titus cannot be compared to the diabolical devices fashioned by modern tyrants in their design to exterminate a whole people. The blood of the innocent who perished in the gas chambers of Auschwitz, Bergen-Belsen, Buchenwald, Dachau, Majdanek, Treblinka, and Theresienstadt cries out to God and to man. They tortured the flesh of our brothers, but they could not crush their spirit, their faith, nor their love of Torah. In the Warsaw Ghetto, Jews valiantly defied the overwhelming forces of the inhuman tyrant. These martyrs lifted up their voices in a hymn, reaffirming their faith in the coming of the Mashiach, when justice and peace shall finally be established for all men. Let us pray, O Lord. Remember thy martyred children. Remember all who have given their lives for Kiddush Hashem, the sanctification of thy name. As we mourn our people's tragic fate, we also recall the compassionate men and women of other faiths and nationalities who, at the peril of their lives, protected and saved thousands of Jews. Let us all pray and work together for that day when there shall be no more violence or desolation anywhere on this earth, when nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. The other almost iconic now observance of on Yom HaShoah is the lighting of a 6 candelabra for the 6 million. And while Jonathan chants Psalm 23, I'm going to call on different families and finally our youth to light a candle. I'm going to call 2 at a time, one to light and one just to remain here to my right. Would the Dubbin family please come up, and the Kalman family over here. There's a special Kaddish of remembrance that we're now going to chant not only for the Holocaust survivors, but for many of the Jewish martyrs throughout history. It's on page 2627. I'm going to ask you to please rise.
Yitkadal,
Kishinev,
Yitkadash,
Warsaw,
Shmei Rabbah,
Auschwitz,
Yalmad Yivrach Yerutei,
Dachau,
Yamlich Malchutei,
Buchenwald,
Chayechon, Yom HaShoah,
Rabi Yar,
Chayei Chol Beit Yisrael,
Baghdad,
Pagala, Uzman Kariv,
Hebron,
Yimru, Amen.
Amen, Yehei Shmei Rabbah V'Barach, Yolam Lomein Ha'aya,
Yitbarach, V'yishtabach,
Kfar Etzion,
V'yitpa'ar, V'yitromam,
Mainz,
V'yitnaseh, V'yithadar,
Raisin,
V'yithaleh, V'yithalal,
Treblinka,
Shmei Usha Brichu,
Bergen-Belsen,
La'ela,
Vilna,
Mikol Berchata V'Shirata,
Usha,
Tushbechata V'Nechamata,
Masada,
Damiran B'Yalma,
Jerusalem,
V'Yibru, Amen. Yehesh Shlomo Rabban Shmaya, V'Chayim Aleinu V'Yalkol Yisrael, V'Yibru, Amen. Oseh Shalom B'Romav, V'Yaseh Shalom, Aleinu V'Yalkol Yisrael, V'Yibru, Amen.
Remain standing now for the beginning of the Mariv service on page 8. This evening in our brief service, we'll manage to experience 4 different Kaddishes. There's the Reader's Kaddish, which we just heard. There was a special Martyr's Kaddish, which we chanted earlier. At the end of the service, there'll be the regular Mourner's Kaddish. And this evening, we're going to hear Ravel's Kaddish performed by a guest artist, which the Cohens will now introduce.
It is our pleasure to introduce Yosif Yankelev, a concert violinist and a teacher. He is a Juilliard School graduate with a Master of Science degree in musical arts. He first heard Jewish music as a child in his native Vilna, Soviet Lithuania. Years later, he rediscovered those sounds as well as other ethnically inspired virtuoso music during his notable career. Recently, he celebrated 50 years of concert stage performances as a soloist and chamber music player.
A winner of prestigious awards as a soloist and competitions, he has recently settled in Coral Springs, is engaged to be married, and is hoping to become part of South Florida's fine music world as a wide-range performer and innovative teacher. He is also the most recent addition to the Beth congregation.
We are familiar with the words of the Kaddish. Now we'll hear something which cannot ever be expressed in words, the actual soul and the very fine vibration of this very high prayer. I will ask you to refrain from applause, as we do not applaud after a verbal Kaddish.
Thank you, Yosif. That was unbelievable. I had a long intro to our speaker and a short version. I'll give you the short version. If you have any questions how I came up with our speaker, the story's interesting and I'll share with you. It's not a problem. Back in January, I was invited to a Holocaust survivors protest rally against Allianz Insurance, who was sponsoring this golf tournament at a country club in Boca Raton. Allianz is one of many insurance companies that have not paid on their policies that were taken out prior and during World War II. So I arrive. 30 or 40 people are there too. Reminded me of back in the 70s when I protested for the freedom of Soviet Jews, posters and banners and all, only I'm 40 years older, and the protesters have 30 years on me. It was a windy, cold, for Florida standards, and a rainy day. And I asked our speaker, Sam Dubbin, should we all be out here? His response was this, and it was clear. Jeff, these people have survived years of concentration camps. They can take the cold, the wind, and the rain. That's when it really hit me. Sam is a graduate from Harvard College with a degree in economics. He's also a graduate from the University of Miami Law School. He's a principal in the firm of Dubbin and Kravitz, and formerly a shareholder in the law firm of Greenberg Traurig, and a former partner in Steele Hector and Davis, and also served in the Justice Department. Sam now is currently a counsel to the Survivors Foundation USA. This is a national coalition of Holocaust survivor leaders, which has been leading the grassroots voice of survivors attempting to recover assets looted from Holocaust victims. Our speaker tonight, he talks the talk, he walks the walk, and from my own personal experience, does not mind getting his shoes wet. I present to you Sam Dubbin.
Thank you so much, Jeff, for inviting me and opening the Bima and the congregation to hear some things that every congregation in the country, I wish were hearing tonight. Thank you, Rabbi Plotkin, for allowing me to come. The awesomeness of the experience of the memory of the 6 million is something that is seared within all of us. I had the privilege of representing Holocaust survivors and the survivor community for almost 15 years now. It's been since 1997 that I first got involved. And Jeff asked me to talk a little bit about how that came about, because the things I'm going to tell you are going to be pretty disturbing. It's almost as if you will have come in from another planet when you learn about the extent to which the living survivors among us have been mistreated, abandoned, denied their rights by no less than the government of the United States of America, the Bush administration, the Obama administration, the congressional leadership, and many of the Jewish organizations who many of us, have served, have worked with, have even given a lot of respect and money to over the years, who have not stood up and backed the rights and interests of the Holocaust survivors in this country and around the world. So in order to give you a little perspective on how I came to this, Jeff thought it would be a good idea for me to tell you exactly why I got as involved as I did. As he said, I do not come from a family that was directly impacted by the Holocaust. I was born in Miami in 1955. My dad was born in Miami in 1929. His grandfather established Temple Beth David in Miami, B'nai Zion at the time, back in the 20s. So, but I come from a generation that's suburban Miami, the 67 war, the 73 war, freedom, the ability to raise a family in freedom and prosperity, traveling to Israel, running the Jewish Student Appeal in college, and standing in the memorial chapel in Yad Vashem and asking myself, how can one individual, bear the burden of this history and carry it forward so that the atrocities that were committed against our people, are remembered and somehow prevented, of course, from ever happening again. And so when I returned from serving in the Clinton administration in the Justice Department, we had 3 small children. We had taken a step out of private practice to serve in the public. But when I returned, it was 1997, and I had been an officer of the Greater Miami Jewish Federation on the board for most of my adult life. I had been the chairman of the Community Relations Committee of the Jewish Federation, which means I worked closely with the Anti-Defamation League, the American Jewish Committee, B'nai B'rith, the World Jewish Congress, a lot of the mainstream, organizations. They were actually, we worked very closely together during my years in the Federation. So when I came back from serving in the Justice Department, it was the time when all the news was out there about the Swiss bank accounts, Nazi gold, and the survivor community who I'd worked with came to me and said, we are worried about all of these headlines about restitution of the assets that were looted from our families, because our experience has been that the institutions of the Jewish community stand up there, wave the flag, grab the seats at the table, cut deals, and then come back to us, the survivors, and say, hey, guess what we did for you? Here are a few crumbs. Aren't you proud of us? Aren't you happy for us? Okay, aren't you thankful to us? And this came as a shock to me because, like I said, I grew up in a world where the victims of the Holocaust were number one in our minds, in our hearts, in our spirits, and in basically our communal life. So to hear the survivors themselves talk about how they had felt concerned about the inability to speak for themselves and have a voice in this process was very disconcerting. So, that allowed me to take some of my previous public service and my Jewish community experience and my legal career and basically undertake, outside of the context of my actual legal practice, but it became a growing part of my daily life to help and work with the survivors. And at the time, there were 2 major issues. One was the insurance policies that were sold to Jewish families before World War II. And it wasn't talked about that much in the 50s and 60s and 70s, but in the 80s and 90s, it started to become more routinely discussed. And the survivors remembered that the agent came to the house every couple of weeks, and my mother had a box up there where a few Zlotys and Pengos were, we put them in there, and they said to us, this is for our future. This is to protect us. Or there was a plaque on the house. This home, this property, this business is insured by Generali. Or the parents saying to the kids, listen, we have insurance, don't worry. There are German survivors who tell me, the morning of Kristallnacht, when the business and the home were burning, and the father said, don't worry, we have insurance. Well, after the war, when the victims went to the insurance companies, said we had insurance, the companies demanded, well, show us a death certificate. We can't pay you without proof of death. And as, survivor after survivor has said, were they insane? Obviously, Hitler was not passing out death certificates in the camps. They demanded original documents. Well, you know, the families were taken out of their house on 5 minutes' notice with one suitcase, stripped of everything as soon as they got to the camps. Obviously, they didn't have the original policy documents that an insurance company, you know, would ask for, but the insurance companies did ask for it, and as a result, the survivors were turned away. And the companies, Allianz, Generali, AXA, common business names around the world, became some of the biggest companies in the world. So the crusade to use the legal system and the political system and the justice system to allow the survivors to have returned to them what was stripped away from them became something that was compelling to me, but more importantly, it was compelling to the survivors and to the children of the survivors. And some of it has to do with the money, because yes, after surviving, you know, hell on earth and somehow making it out of Europe, which was still dangerous after the war, these young people at the time could have used that money that was owed to their mothers and fathers and grandparents. Somehow they managed to make it through the decades. But so yes, it's about the money because that's their property and they're entitled to it. But it's also about the morality, the history of the family that was stripped away from them. Those insurance policies said a lot about what people's lives were like. And so the survivors, you know, had every right to demand their insurance policies back. So we went to work and created a national survivor organization, as Jeff mentioned. States around the country, New York, California, Florida, all stepped in and passed laws to assist and force the companies, because they all do business here, to publish the names of the policyholders, allow the survivors to go to court, give a window of time for that to unfold. But the insurance companies, you know, they obviously had a lot at stake. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of policies sold to Jewish families that were never paid. Today, that's worth $20 billion. Now, no one's going to collect $20 billion because so many families were annihilated that their family policies literally went up in smoke. But there are survivors who have the right as heirs to those funds, and the children and grandchildren should inherit those funds because the insurance companies should not be the heirs of the victims of the Holocaust. Well, unfortunately, so that was the compelling effort that drew me in the sense of the fear by the survivors that this was not going to work out well for them. So as a hopeful, optimistic person, you know, with experience in government and law, I felt that was a place where I could make a contribution, and that's why I got involved. But the second thing I learned in the process, which was worse, was I found out how many Holocaust survivors living in this community, Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Palm Beach, New York, LA, Chicago, Boston, were living in poverty, alone, and not getting the food, the medicine, the dentures, the home care that they need. And we're talking now about 1998, 1999, 2000. We're talking about an era when, yes, we've been having Yom HaShoah observances for decades now. And we've been doing it the right way, and we do honor the dead, and somehow the community had ignored the living, the people who actually endured this hell on earth. And as I learned more about this, as a board of my own federation, I went to the federation board, I said, you know, the survivors are telling me that that many are living alone, and as they get older and get sicker, and one spouse gets ill, they don't have the physical ability to help, the resources aren't there to help, they don't have in-home care. And there was, you know, and this was not only in Miami, it was in Broward, it was in Palm Beach, it was in New York City. There was a lack of awareness, and I would call it a don't ask, don't tell policy among the leadership of our own Jewish communities who were not aware of the extent to which Holocaust survivors were going without the help they needed. Now, this, you know, really, I felt was one of the most profound disgraces that I'd ever encountered. And so once we started peeling away at the problem, in Miami we found out that there were about 250 survivors who had entered into the system of the Jewish Family Services. Of those, about 120, and on average they needed 12 hours of home care a week. People in their 70s and 80s. About half of the survivors were getting 4 of the 12 hours of home care they needed. The other half were getting 0. This is one of the wealthiest communities in the country, and a community that considers itself a success. And I got news for you, it was worse in Broward. Now, Broward's survivor community was not as old and not as ill, but the numbers were larger and the amount of people going without help was worse. And Palm Beach County was somewhere in the middle. And I can assure you it's the same in New York and LA and Chicago. When the National Federation System finally did a survey, they determined that 1/4 of all Holocaust survivors in the United States, okay, and at the time we're talking about 40,000, there were 174,000 survivors in the country, so about 40,000 were living below the poverty line. And another 25% had income so low they were considered poor according to demographic information and could not afford sufficient nutrition, dentures. I mean, the dental care, the dental health of survivors is atrocious, as you know, and the cost of fixing that is exorbitant. And still, in this country, thousands and thousands of survivors are not getting the dental care they need, the home care they need, the eyeglasses, the hearing aids. We are still not providing that. But when I learned this back in the year 1999, 2000, 2001, it got me, more and more deeply involved. So the demands to restitute the insurance policies, the property that was stolen that these private companies owe to the survivors was something that I became deeply involved in, along with this problem of making sure that survivors had adequate care. And where should that care come from? Who should be paying for it? So dealing with the insurance issue as a case study, in 99, 2000, the states did act to protect the survivors. Well, the insurance companies, with billions of dollars on the line, got together and basically created a system that, where they had a big commission and they said they were going to pay everybody, and they basically paid for it, controlled it, and at the end of the day paid 3% of the 800,000 insurance policies the Jewish families owed. Okay, that means that there are still hundreds of thousands of these policies that were unpaid, and the courts held, because the executive branch, the Bush and the Obama administrations both said that for foreign policy reasons, Holocaust survivors, American citizens, many of whom served in the U.S. military after they got here, after being turned away on the St. Louis, surviving hell, came back and served in the U.S. Army. They don't have the same right to, they don't have the right to go to court to recover the insurance policies that Allianz, Generali, AXA sold to their parents and grandparents. That's the law today. Holocaust survivors are second-class citizens under American law today. I mean, think about that. Now, so I'm asking how many people in this, well, Jewishly educated community are aware of that fact? I doubt many of you are. So fortunately, we do, because of the Holocaust Survivors Foundation USA, which is a national coalition of well-spirited and tough, men and women in their 80s, have had the determination to vindicate their rights. Okay, it's a matter of principle. Now, many do need the money, but every one of them are willing to stand up and say, there's no way I'm going to go to my grave being denied, but being treated in the United States of America the way we were treated in a totalitarian country with our rights stripped away. So we have, the good news is that there are about 90 members of the United States Congress, led by the South Florida delegation, Ileana Ross-Lehtinen, Ted Deutsch, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, Alcee Hastings, Alan West, Frederica Wilson, Mario Diaz-Balart. They've all been phenomenal, with Ileana at the very top of the chart, because she's been at this for over a decade. they've been pushing legislation in Congress to restore the survivors' rights to go to court. So have Bill Nelson and Marco Rubio, joining with bipartisan members from around the country. So the good news is there is a movement to fix this problem. Now let me tell you the bad news. Who do you think is fighting against the survivors getting the rights to go to court? Okay. The Obama administration, number one. The Democratic and Republican leadership in the House, okay, that's Boehner and Cantor, that's Pelosi, that's Harry Reid and Mitch McConnell. They've not committed to helping the survivors, so that means they're against until they commit to helping. Now, add this, the American Jewish Committee, the Anti-Defamation League, B'nai B'rith, the World Jewish Congress, they are supporting the insurance companies. They have literally filed papers before Congress saying that they think that this commission that was set up was good enough for the survivors. It paid 3% of the policies, but these groups with no responsibility or membership or right to interfere with the individual constitutional rights of the Holocaust survivors have had the audacity to say, we know better than the survivors what's right for them. And they have, shamed themselves by using the good name of these organizations, which, let's face it, they didn't earn. They're exploiting the fact that they have this platform and they're supporting the insurance companies against the survivors. Now, so it's arrogant, to say the least, and I regret to tell you that at least two of the groups have financial ties to the insurance companies. The ADL has taken money from Generali, one of the biggest culprits that owes $2 billion to survivors. And the American Jewish Committee, to this day, is taking money from Allianz, which, as Jeff indicated, was Hitler's insurance company, insured the camps. Its chairman was Hitler's Minister of Economics. And you may recall a few years ago, if you're a sports fan, that the Jets and the Giants were building a new stadium in the Meadowlands. They were secretly negotiating with Allianz for naming rights to the stadium. Allianz was prepared to pay $300 million to name the Meadowlands Stadium. Now, they owe $2 billion to the survivors, which they haven't paid. They're willing to pay $300 million to put their name on that stadium in the Meadowlands. Now, here was a good news story, because the good people of New York and New Jersey rose up and they said, we're not going to take this. Thankfully, the New York Times and the New York Post and some of the New Jersey media did some research, disclosed who Allianz was and what it had done, and there was such a public outcry that the Tisch family, the Jewish family that was negotiating with Allianz, said, we're not going to do this. So what did Allianz do? Well, guess what? They took their little bag of gold dust and went to the American Jewish Committee and went to other Jewish groups and said, what's it going to take for us to basically, buy your love? This was an embarrassment for us. We want to make good. Well, why didn't they come to the survivors and say, we want to pay you what we owe you? Why didn't they come to the survivors and say, we realize that there are thousands and thousands of survivors in this country who aren't getting the food, the medicine, the dental care that they need. We want to do something about that. How utterly cynical to go to the politically well-known Jewish groups and offer them money to, basically, buy their good name back. And it gets worse. Does anyone here listen to National Public Radio in the morning? Marketplace Morning Report, 7:55 and 8:55, brought to you by Allianz. A Prairie Home Companion, Garrison Keillor, brought to you by Allianz. CNBC, MSNBC. I mean, these are well-respected platforms who companies like Allianz are paying off in order to create the appearance that this is a company you can trust, when in fact it betrayed the customers, in the worst of times, who they certainly owed the money that was contracted for in good faith by the Jewish families before the Holocaust. So when I describe my background here, you should know that I'm about as mainstream from the Jewish community, from communal life, from the federation system, from the organized system as I can possibly be. but I can't pretend that it isn't an utter disgrace to see these Jewish groups opposing Holocaust survivors on any grounds, because it is. It's a disgrace. And so I'm here tonight to say that, yes, like the survivors I've worked with, all, obviously, the Yom HaShoah, they participate in every single one they can. As David Mermelstein, a survivor I've worked with for over a decade, said, we don't need to be reminded. We live with this every day, but obviously Yom HaShoah serves to tell the rest of the world that our families were murdered and others were murdered, and it gives us a chance to say Kaddish for our loved ones, and it gives others a chance to say Kaddish for those who were murdered for whom there was no one left to say Kaddish. So the power of this moment to humanity is something that is deeply ingrained in me. But I want to say that we should use this opportunity to acknowledge our responsibility to the living survivors, those whose legal rights have been stripped away, and those who are living in poverty, and whom the community and the United States government and governments at all levels have not honored by allowing them to suffer in their final years. So my reason for speaking tonight was to make sure that you all were informed of these facts. Jeff knows how to contact me. I am asking you and begging you, if you are part of any of these organizations, pick up the phone, call the local director, call the local president, and say, I understand that the American Jewish Committee is supporting the insurance companies against the Holocaust survivors. I find this to be very, disgraceful. This is not acceptable. You don't have the right to oppose the people who have numbers on their arms, who saw their parents go up and smoke at Auschwitz. What possible arrogance could give an organization like that the belief that they should be interfering with their rights? So that they need to hear this from you, from the grassroots, and from people who might be involved with organizations, ADL, AJC, B'nai B'rith, the World Jewish Congress. And the federation system has been neutral, which basically means they're on the wrong side of this because they're not standing with the survivors. And you need to bring this up to your federation leadership, because it's something where their silence at this time will be remembered the same way as the silence of many of the same Jewish organizations and the passiveness of the Jewish organizations during the Holocaust, who did not speak up when they had the opportunity to do so. So we're here for the dead. We also need to be here for the living. And I thank you again for giving me the chance to speak with you tonight.
So firstly, thank you for coming. Thank you for carrying the battle and for sharing the message. And I think the question that those who heard you speak with some sympathy and empathy want to say is, so what exactly can we do? So I just want to announce, first of all, that Sam's going to hang around a little bit after the service concludes in a few moments. So if anybody wants to set up a personal communication, you can do that. If you can't get to him now, or you don't have time now, Jeff's always around, and you can speak through Jeff. He can hook you up. And I'm sure that they could use whatever resources you have to bring to the story. I don't know if you got the message that Jeff was explaining about that picket, that event. There was a golf tournament, right? And it was just basically up the street. So we're not talking about something happening, in the ethers somewhere. There was a golf tournament, a big tournament in Boca, sponsored by Allianz. And, it's just something happening, and it's happening everywhere. So that's something you may want to continue to discuss. But I want to thank you again for your words, for your efforts, and see where it goes.